This is the Women of Wonder podcast, where we help women tap into their superpowers. Welcome, everyone, to Women of Wonder. I'm here with the wonderful Jen Murtagh. Jen, thanks for being here.
It's such an honor.
Well, it's so great. And so I am excited to have Jen here. She is the co-founder of Matern. Maybe you can tell us a bit about Matern. It's like this beautiful organization. I had the pleasure of speaking to some of her fantastic women. Tell us about the great work you're doing with that.
Yeah, so Matern is really supporting women at the intersection of motherhood and leadership. And so we do that in a couple of different ways. The first being what we're probably most well known for is our maternity leave program. I personally struggled as a career-minded woman through the maternity leave pause and the return to work. I remember feeling like a little bit shell-shocked returning back to work after my first daughter.
Yes. Yeah, me too.
And so we created a program that really supports mothers as they're transitioning to leave, like help getting them ready for leave. Then we support them through that entire time they're on leave. And then we help get them prepared for that return to work, which can feel pretty overwhelming. Mm-hmm. We also work with mothers once they're back at work, really when they're growing their career and their family, and they're really feeling that push and pull, especially when their kids are, under the ages of 10, between how do I keep expanding my impact and my leadership while I'm raising these young humans that are taking a lot from me.
Yes.
And then we work with a lot of organizations on maternal bias training and different workshops. A lot of people don't know that maternal bias is the most pervasive form of gender bias.
Wow.
And it really derails a lot of women in their careers as they're becoming mothers. And so we're working with now over 85 companies across Canada. And we're also releasing data and reports on how to make systemic change in our country so that women aren't penalized for having children, which they are now, called the motherhood penalty.
Wow, I just got all the shivers hearing all of this. Like this is big stuff. And when I think about what you're saying, I'm a mother of two. My kids are 11 and 9. So I thought you were going to say, Mother's Challenges kids under 5 or something. And then when you said 10, I was like, that really makes more sense, actually, because there is so much that's involved. And then we are giving and then also trying to balance a career, but yet, what did you call it? The motherhood, the penalty.
Yeah.
So there's a penalty. And tell me about that. Like, what does that mean? Because I feel it. I feel that.
Well, the motherhood penalty really is the research that has been done for decades on essentially how becoming a mother is the most financially disadvantaged things that mothers can do. So mothers are 8.2 times less likely to receive a promotion versus women without children. Starting salaries for mothers versus non-mothers are on average 12% lower. There's also, the maternal wall, which are really the biases, the stereotypes that women experience. For example, someone might look at a woman and be like, well, when she becomes a mother, she's going to be less committed, less competent, less capable, because she's going to have other things to worry about. So Whereas the inversely is correlated for men. There's actually something called the fatherhood bonus, which sees men's earnings increase more than 6% as a result of becoming a parent. And that's because the unconscious bias is that men are viewed as more stable, more committed, more of a provider. Right. And they're actually bonused for that. The research sort of shows that. So, I think given that we're trying to advance women in leadership positions, given that we have an aging population, our birth rate is falling. We're looking to immigration more and more because we can't fill the amount of jobs we have in Canada.
Yeah, true.
That women should be bonused for having children, not penalized.
Oh my gosh, I hear you. I feel that. We should be bonused. We should be appreciated because we're taking that next step. And otherwise, what does that do for us? That almost tells us is it you really question it then?
Well, I think for a lot of women, they're seen as less valuable. Where we believe at Matern, women are, even more valuable to their employer as a result of becoming a mother because all the different leadership skills that you also develop as a result of becoming a parent, which well.
So many leadership skills. I wish I was getting bonused actually for all the things I'm learning as I'm doing this work, because I would be swimming in the money, I'd be swimming in it because there's so many things that I have learned and how to even be like uber organized and like on it for everything and juggling like so many schedules, but also pushing through when I might be sick because I have a house full of, like there's so many things that just take us to this like superhuman experience. And yet then we're looked at like, oh, they're not achieving as much. We're actually achieving like way more.
Yeah,
More.
your capacity absolutely is expanding. A lot of women view it in the lens of like, well, I can't work till 9:00 every night because, I got to get my kids to bed, so I'm not as valuable. But I think we're looking at things wrong. Our capacity is actually expanded.
So it's fascinating that we are, as a society, maybe devaluing women once they hit, this new stage of motherhood. But look at all that we're doing as a society to like help grow the community and also to nurture these beautiful humans to be their best selves so that they grow and add to community. And yet from like a business perspective, maybe we're not being valued in that way. And so how are you changing? First of all, by even talking about this is a very important topic, right? So you're bringing awareness to it. You've started a business that is based on helping women and supporting them in organizations and helping organizations understand, okay, you have this bias you might not even know, right? And so like, how does it feel to be a leader in this area yourself as you're like, and why? Why did you get into this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually, okay, so like full truth telling.
I want to hear all the truth.
I never was one of those girls who grew up being like, I can't wait till I become a mother. Like my whole life will just be complete when I become a mother. I thought maybe, I might want to become a mother.
Yeah.
And so when I had my own children, when I had my daughter, I went on my first leave. I was like really on the leadership track at that point. I was a director of marketing.
Right.
A lot of my worth and value, probably too much, was entrenched in that career.
Like you are like C-suite, like you've been in all these like high positions. So you were entrenched in your career. And I'm going to be full honest as I add to this conversation. I didn't necessarily see the motherhood like path. I used to question, say, sure, like, do we need to? Like, we might not have to have children,
right?
So like, I feel you, and it's not everyone's automatic, and some people are, but it's not an automatic. Why? Probably because of these things that we're seeing, the value, right?
And then I struggled so much in the early years of motherhood. My daughter, I've shared openly, had colic. My first daughter, she screamed 4 to 6 hours a day for the first 4 months of leave.
Yeah, that's
I
tough.
felt very isolated. I felt very lonely. I was this like joyful, effervescent, like always out in the community to basically being at home full time with a screaming baby.
It's a huge change.
I didn't even like maternity leave. I couldn't wait to get back to work.
You actually get breaks when you're at work. You get to have a morning start. You get to put on clothes. You get to talk to people. You get to, like you have a moment. You have a moment of quiet even.
Anytime I run into moms and they would be like, isn't maternity leave amazing? Don't you never want to go back to work? I would want to punch them in the face because I felt so gypped of my motherhood experience. So to think that I'd ever be working with mothers, like but here's the thing I've learned about callings. Callings can also come from a place of pain in your life, from a place of suffering.
Beautiful, Jen.
And if I look back during that time, I mean, it sounds so privileged to even have this conversation saying I was actually suffering during that time of my first baby. And so it took me probably about 10 years to actually recognize that I buried a lot of that. And I think that's what happens for a lot of women because you come back into your job, you're supposed to just pick up where you left off, and you've changed as a human, a lot. And the concept of matrescence, and that can last up to 10 years after the birth of your first child.
What's matrescence?
Well, matrescence is really, it was coined by an anthropologist, and I cannot remember her name right now. It's not in front of me. But essentially, it's the concept similar to adolescence. Like it is a period of time where immense changes are happening for you.
The biggest changes.
Physical, hormonal, spiritual, financial. And so it's a concept basically that like once the fog of newborn life has lifted, you sort of realize, well, this isn't getting any easier.
It's not getting easier. And also no one really told me about this.
Yeah, the identity shifts. All of that happening. So I think what's really pulled me into this work was the fact that probably one, I had a mother that didn't have a lot of choices. And I saw that through my eyes growing up with a single mother. And two, the struggles that I had as a mother and as someone that wanted to continue to build my career. So I wanted to do work with women that really created community around the normalization of the conversations that need to happen, and also provide coaching and support and all the things I felt like I didn't have during that really intense period of my life.
Oh, it's so amazing. And I feel like you coming in and then seeing what, like, this is what I've experienced, this is where my pain lies, and then saying, how can I support other women who, so that they don't go through that, or so that we actually, what I really admire is that you're even looking to change the system. You're looking at systemic change. It's not only that I would like to support you, women in leadership as mothers, but how do we shift the whole landscape so that it is more aware?
Yeah.
That is brilliant. And I think that as women, we have power to shift these big ideas so that we're in the picture, so that we're included, so that we're feeling good. Because when we as women feel good, I think everyone feels better.
Totally.
Right.
You know what? I often think, am I going to wait for the world to change and evolve? Or do I want to be part of the revolutionary change of the world by saying, you know what? This isn't good enough.
This
I
is
know
not
this
good
is the way
enough.
it's been done for the last 50 years, but it needs to be disrupted. It needs to be changed.
Disrupt it. And like, what I also love is that you are doing this from a very heart-centered place. Okay, so as I've met you, Jen, I just feel the love emanating out of you, right? The happiness, the joy. I know it's not all, that is not how it always is, but you are showing up. You know, you're going to show up with that heart-centered. So tell me about like this heart-centered leadership that is guiding you as you have done, like, you know, work with like big organizations and like been C-suite, and then even now working with 80 different organizations to like get this going. How does this heart-centered leadership guide you, and where does it come from?
Well, I think I have always been someone who has had a really strong core value around empathy.
Yeah.
I've always felt deeply with other people and for other people. And I remember that as I was a little girl. And I think...
Oh, I could picture you just a sunshine, a little, yes, love it.
I mean, I always felt deeply with others, whether that be, I remember some of the earliest images of growing up was of the Ethiopian famine when I grew up in the 80s.
Yeah.
And just being struck with like this deep sense of injustice. Well, how come these kids that just were born in a different part of the world don't have food? Like, that doesn't feel fair.
Yeah.
And so I think that's just sort of followed me in my career. Anything that I've done, I've wanted to have a lot of impact in my life and meaning and purpose. And I loved you just were talking recently on your Instagram channel about self-actualization. And I feel like that's where a lot of women are moving into. And so I would think that heart-centered leadership for me is around leading with your core values.
Amazing.
And taking the time to actually define what those values are to you, and then how do you show up inside of those on a day-to-day basis so that it feels aligned for you, that it feels expansive. We all know when we're operating outside of our integrity and operating outside of our core values. And I think I've had the privilege to get to a position in my career where I say, I just don't want to do that anymore. Like, it needs to be really aligned for me all the time. And I think just continuing as leaders to lead with more empathy. I feel like empathy feels like it's decreasing, and I see it all the time.
Yeah.
And it just makes me feel like more and more we need to be centering conversations around empathy and understanding and compassion.
Oh, I love that. This is so beautiful, right? Because it's interesting because when I was younger, 20 years ago, and I was in this, you know, in the industries and like working, and I felt like there was a lot of like me trying to step into my masculine power in order to be a strong leader. And so that was the win. If I could be the strong masculine type of leader and lead in that way, then that was like, that's what you're striving for. However, now as I'm doing the work and like Women of Wonder, we want women to tap into like, who are you? Where is your feminine energy? Where do we can thrive and lead with the feminine. And I feel that from you as well, that this is like where you're, and I also feel like it's a good balance of masculine and feminine, right? Like
Both
it's not
are
just,
good.
both are good. So tell me a bit about like, what does that look like, or how does that feel for you?
I think if you would have asked me 5-10 years ago, tell me how you lead from your feminine energy, I would have just probably looked at you blankly.
What are you talking about?
I was just always like, the story I created around who I was I'm this like type A, like vision, like get from A to B in the fastest period possible. I was maybe a little bit more impatient. I cared more about titles and advancing and climbing the corporate ladder. And what I recognized is I was completely disconnected from my body. So I was just like operating from sort of the head up. And I would say I wasn't callous. Like I was definitely still an empathic person with good values, but I just had no connection to that feminine energy. And so feminine power is more about connectedness, relational, it's creative, it's non-linear, right? It's like, I don't need to know the 5 steps of how to get where I'm going in order to take the first step. It's like the recognition that paths can be unfolding. We don't necessarily need to know what the end game is to start. And I talk to women all the time who are like, well, I just need the business plan and I need to know exactly what I'm doing and how much I'm going to make in order to like leave that corporate job and start that. And that's very masculine power. Masculine power is very linear. It's measured in sort of success and power and finances. But feminine power is like, it's very different that way. And so to be able to tap into my feminine energy, I had to start to tap into my body and my body wisdom, which I was completely disconnected from.
You were disconnected
because I was always just racing through life from one thing to the next.
Of course, because we're taught that is achievement, that's the way to do it. What is it that helped you realize that, and that for you to get into your body, that was important?
Well, during COVID, I was working for myself at that point. I was consulting, and I was consulting in the nonprofit space. I was solely in my zone of excellence. I hadn't quite made the leap to my zone of genius yet.
Oh, I like this.
And so I was working in that, and then COVID hit. All of my nonprofit consulting clients were like, Jen, we can't afford you anymore. And I thought, wow, what am I going to do? I think it's time to take this leap that I've been considering for a while. And so while I was doing that, I was sort of working the least amount I'd ever worked in my life. And that was a very difficult space for me to navigate on a bunch of different levels.
It's huge, right? Because you feel like your worth can be tied to, this is how I felt. My worth is tied to my achievement. And that's why I think it's even hard, like in maternity or when like COVID hit and things changed, like, wait, but like now what?
But who am
I? Who am I without all my ding, ding, ding and accolades and all that?
I took this program called Feminine Power by Dr. Claire Zammit. And
what
it was
a good name.
Probably the most transformational online course I've ever taken in my life. And it's, thousands of women around the globe are taking it. And it was really around how feminine power is evolving. And she gave us specific practices about how to tune into our feminine power. And a large part of that was doing things, practices that get you into your body. And we all have those times where we feel really clear about things, or maybe I would say my soul, my soul just feels like it's speaking to me. And then we get busy again and we forget.
We get distracted.
So I started finding out what are the things that actually I hear the inner voice, like the inner knowing's there, and I'm listening, and in order to
intuition,
your intuition, and feminine power is very intuitive, and so I started doing practices, including meditation and walking and yoga and things to actually open up the dialogue between my head and my heart, which was I was completely cut off from for most of my career. And when I started those practices, things started happening.
You notice it, right?
Yeah.
It's like things start shifting, like gifts. I almost call them like gifts start coming when I'm doing the work, the good work. The gifts in the universe is like, here you go.
Yeah, and there were certain practices as well, like all opportunities happen through a matrix of relationships. Like think about all opportunities that come from you. They usually come through people. And so if you're blocking that, because I was feeling very vulnerable and maybe even a bit shameful that I didn't have work at the time. So I wasn't opening up the opportunities by talking to people. And I think for a lot of women, we create stories around what it means to be open to or receive help. or support. And it might be like, well, I don't want to look like I don't know what I'm doing. Or if I have to ask for help now and I'm going to be a burden on someone, or I'm going to owe them. And so I recognize that the more open to support I am, the more powerful my work can become, and the more connected my relationships are. So it was around, like, really it was about shattering my own inner glass ceiling, that sort of that program. And so I took those practices forward, and it was really through that the idea for Matern evolved.
Oh, this is amazing. I love this because in your own bravery to shatter your own glass ceiling came the vision or the dream to help other women step into their bravery. Mm-hmm. And so what have you seen? Like, you've noticed the differences in you. What have you noticed with the women that you're working with? Mm-hmm. Like, what changes with this kind of support or these conversations, or like helping them even see what is possible for them?
So many things. So I run a coaching business as well, sort of on the side from Matern. But I run a program called Brave Leadership for Women, because I believe as women, we need to be braver.
Yes.
And what that means to an individual can be different. So some of the shifts that I've seen, so many things. Women just getting really clear on what's most important to them, and being brave to hold boundaries, to say no to things so that they can say yes to themselves. Amazing. I've seen a lot of women in my program change careers, the recognition that this is no longer serving me, like it was for the last 5 years, but not anymore, not based on who I am today, and leaving careers, leaving relationships, starting new companies, showing up inside of their organizations and corporations by using their voice more, not being afraid, not letting the inner critic keep their voice, low or not contributing. So they've been able to really shift away from that inner critic and lean into their own voice, their own power. There's been, it's beautiful usually at the end of these programs, because the women all share, what the last 3 or 4 months has meant to them. And that's why I lean into this work. This is my soul work. This really is your
soul work. And I love, so what I believe also, which I love, you're a great example of this, is that our soul is here for a purpose. Mm-hmm. And if we can find, like you had mentioned, I talked about self-actualization. If we can find what our purpose is in this lifetime and then put energy into that, then we vibrate positively, we shine out. And then we also help humanity. Yeah. Like, this is a win-win-win, right? Yeah. We feel good, others feel good. Like, this should be part of what we do while we're here, is figure out not just how do I make a lot of money. It's not about that. It's about, and not saying that the money won't come if you're doing what you're passionate. You can be happy, passionate, successful, and do good.
And I think what helped me, I love what you said there. It can be all.
It can be all.
I think where a lot of people struggle is they're like, well, I don't know what my purpose is, or I don't know what my calling is. I sort of learned you can have multiple callings in life.
Yes, I like to do.
Like a calling can start and it can end, or it can move into something else. And
shifts.
And so when I got into that zone of genius work, which was the zone of excellence, is sort of along the lines of things you're good at, things that you have a track record of success in. People will pay you money to do those things, but you don't necessarily feel expansive and excited and lose track of time when you're doing them. You can just do them and do them well. When I was able to make that leap to zone of genius, which was understanding what are the things that I do innately really well, maybe my entire life, my strengths, but when I'm doing them, I actually feel like it's not work. I feel in flow. I lose track of time. I could that fill me up in such a different way. And when I was able to start really getting clearer on that, and that was through journaling and coaching, then I started to realize, all those steps have sort of pointed me in this direction. And so I really encourage people to think about that. How do you make the leap? And there is a really great book from Gay Hendricks called The Big Leap, on how you make the leap from zone of excellence work to zone of genius work. Because if you're doing zone of genius work, you're never going to feel, I think you're always going to feel fulfilled. I always feel like there's endless opportunity, and the only thing that gets in the way of them is my ambition and resources and time, right?
Yeah. So it's only ourself.
Yeah.
We can dream and do things, but we almost limit, I find that I've done that in life, limit myself. But I like that you're no, expand and do more. And also, like, I love the work that you're doing to help people. So you were talking that you came earlier from doing some work with One Girl Can. And I know that you've done you've done a lot of volunteer, which I want to say, I love that. And you've done work even in Africa. Can you tell us about like that connection and how that work fills you as well?
Yeah. I mean, again, it goes back to sort of the empathy and equality piece.
Yeah.
And so we have obviously a lot of resources and privilege here living in Canada, being, grown up here. And I recognize I have even more privilege, even though I grew up on the poverty line, with a single mother. I recognize I still have a ton of privilege due to my accent, my skin color, all the things. And so I think it's, incumbent upon us to, when we're in that position, to obviously, give and do to others. So I was really inspired by the founder, Lottie Davis, who I met many years ago, and have been supporting in a volunteer capacity for about the last 7 or 8 years. It was always a dream of mine to go to Africa and to go with her, and just being able to meet the girls there and see how extraordinarily bright and committed and joyful these girls are, and how any opportunity to support their education, which we know is the way out of poverty for girls.
Yes.
I feel, just really deeply privileged to be involved with the organization and to support the really good work of One Girl Can.
Oh, it's so powerful, right? And so I know you're a mother, you are a business owner, you are, achieving great things. You're helping, you're shifting whole perspectives on what it means to like value women, and you're giving back, you're volunteering, you're connecting other women. All these like things that are not just, like you don't have to do any of this.
Yeah, and I'm in a season in my life, and I just want to preface this because I'm in a season in my life where I actually have a lot of energy.
Yeah.
And I recognize there's times in our life where we don't feel that way.
Yes.
So my dad passed away last year, and I can tell that was a time of contraction for me. I was caring for him over 6 years. He was diagnosed with stage 4 prostate cancer. And that was like a lot of my energy. And this is what shows like a lot of the caregiving comes from women, right? And that takes from us. And so I think there's an understanding for me as well as like my career trajectory is long, we're living much longer nowadays. I'm not probably going to even retire when I'm 60.
No.
I want to always be working in my own purpose. And so I think for women, recognizing for yourself, like, where am I at right now? Does this feel like a time of expansion?
Yes.
Or does this feel like a time of just status quo, like just let's keep it moving? Or does this feel like a time of contraction for me? Do I need to like bring it all back in, this concept of taking it all down, sloughing away what's not working anymore so that you can prune to then expand even more? And that's okay to have periods of your life that don't feel expansive. They will come. Sometimes it's just the season that you're in. And so having patience and understanding and compassion with yourself. And there were so many days where I was like, Jen, you're just doing the best job you can right now. Okay.
Yeah.
This is not forever. This is today. This is right now. It will come. Just be patient.
Wow.
Be patient with the timeline, which is not something I've traditionally been patient with.
That's not what we're always encouraged to do. And first I want to say thank you for sharing that. That is like, it's these kinds of stories that are so powerful, right? Because we can say, you can do it all and let's go and blah, blah, blah. However, this is the reality. It's not always easy. And there are I felt those moments of contraction where my father passed away and then my brother passed away. So I was not feeling like I want to be out there and I want to be excited or I want to be interested. I just want to sometimes be quiet and go inwards. And in fact, those inwards moments, because I allowed them to happen, right? Instead of trying to push myself, if I allowed myself to say, like probably with my dad's death, I did push myself. With my brother's death, I allowed myself to go where I needed to, inwards. Then that allows us to, did you find? Yes. Then when it's time to come out, that you're actually shining and not just burnt out and still there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You just nailed that. Yeah, and that can be hard, especially when we live in a society where we're comparing ourselves a lot, where a lot of our value, our worth is dependent upon how we're doing in relevance to others. And just go on social media for 30 minutes to not feel good about yourself. Or sometimes on LinkedIn,
Right.
people are posting things. And so it does take a lot of inner work and inner navigation to be okay with where you are right now. And the fact that when you do contract, that will give you the energy in order to, keep growing.
Yes.
And you'll feel more inspired. You cannot be creative when you are coming from a place of lack or scarcity or overwhelm or exhaustion. You cannot physically be or spiritually or mentally in a place of creativity and giving when you're in that place. So I think it's about, sometimes I'm like, where am I right now? Am I above the line? Am I below the line? I recognize the signs when I'm below the line. And then it's usually about, okay, clear the decks.
Yeah.
What do I need to order to get myself back up above the line? And how did I get here again?
Great question. First of all, how do you think you did get there again? And also, what are the signs that you notice? And what do you do to get to a place of feeling good?
I truly believe life keeps serving us the same lessons until we decide we're ready to learn them.
100%. If it's not, and we'll keep learning them in this lifetime until maybe in the next one. Yeah.
The signs for me are I feel resentful.
Yes.
I'm blaming.
Yeah.
I'm maybe crying a bit more than I normally do. I'm impatient with my children. The number one sign that I'm below the line, I won't read my kids a second bedtime story.
Oh, that's so, wow. I love that.
I know when I'm above the line where I'm like, sure, I'll read you another story.
Keep going.
It's not like, go to bed.
Go to bed. I know those moments. That was me last night.
Yeah, because my cup's a little bit fuller, and so I can give more to others. So those are some signs for me. I think everybody's different.
Yes.
But I think the resentment one is big. And if I just am in a more of a negative mind space for a period of time. Yeah. Now, granted, I'm also a bit perimenopausal. So sometimes I'm like, is this on below the line or is this hormone fluctuations?
Maybe it's all of it. I feel you. Maybe it's a little bit of all of it. And that's good to talk about too, right? Whereas in the past, I think people weren't really talking about that as much. It's like...
No, the legacy of self-deprivation for women is like a real thing.
It's a real thing. We just go through our whole life and then don't talk about it. But we want to. Yeah. But now it's becoming more that we can share and acknowledge this is going to be maybe a challenging time. But this is how we can come or enjoy it even. This is how we can even enjoy it while we're in it, so we're not putting so much pressure on ourselves.
Yeah, and the time piece is a big one. I don't know how many women you speak to, but the vast majority of women I speak to is, I don't have enough time.
Yeah.
I don't have enough time for this. I don't have enough time for that.
I don't have enough time for me.
And if I believe that story, I'm never going to have enough time.
Never.
And so I sort of would talk to myself and say, because I love and value myself, I'm going to create the time. I'm going to say no to this so I can say yes to this.
Yes.
And also ending that legacy of self-deprivation where all of my value and worth was because I was doing things for others.
Yes.
I can still do things for others and prioritize my own needs. These two things can coexist. And then structurally, how does that need to change then on my day-to-day? What would need to shift in my life in order to create more time for myself?
Yes.
So I started looking at it from a foundational perspective rather than just keeping the story going as I don't have enough time.
Oh, so it's such a brilliant, important statement, right? That we can give away as we sometimes have. I have, you have, many women I'm sure have, just giving it all away. All away because that makes me feel like that's what I should do. And that's where I have value and I should do for others. And then when there's nothing left for self, where'd you go? And why are we not feeling so good? And so I love that you're saying it's making that time for self and others. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And then watch us shine. And then watch us go.
Yeah, because most of the time when you're feeling burnt out, it's because you haven't created the conditions for your needs to also be included.
Right.
And I know that's a difficult thing for women because historically women were valued. Our primary value came from caregiving and being super moms and being selfless and always being there for others and putting everyone's needs in front of our own. And I think I'm happy to know that narrative is now changing.
Yes.
Because that's obviously not where our value and worth comes from.
No.
And now, because of our feminist revolution, we're now also bringing on all the things that men were traditionally valued for, which was their ability to achieve, to provide, to be successful, to be financially stable, all those things. And now women are judging themselves on all of these overwhelming amount of expectations. And
Huge.
so I don't know. I feel like it's time for us to stand up to say, no, that doesn't work for me, actually.
No.
So that external validation to that internal validation. Like,
Yes.
what's most important to me? What are my own key performance indicators when it comes
I
to
like
what
it.
success looks like for me,
Yes.
regardless of what's going on, in the world?
Yes.
And so not carving out time, because that feels like you're taking it away from it. How do you create more time for your needs?
Right.
And then what would that look like on a week-to-week basis? What would you want to do with that time? And then they're having conversations about how do you create that? It can be done. But if you keep telling yourself the story, I don't have enough time, you'll never have enough time.
Yeah, you just keep in that wheel, just go, go. And I think it's even starting with, what do I need first? Where is the time in my calendar? Where am I going to feel I can put cool things for me to bring me joy?
A wonderful coach said to me, Ursula, she said, Jen, what does love look like for you today? And I thought, wow, that's actually, instead of like, what do I need to do today?
Yeah.
What would love look like for me today? Even if it's 5 minutes or 10 minutes,
Yeah.
one
all it
thing that I
takes.
could do for myself.
Wow, that is so beautiful. Well, I just, first of all, love our conversation. I love that we're ending on love, and that, as you are expanding and doing the work and caring for self, that you're also bringing us with you, and that you're doing that for like not only the women, but for the collective. This isn't just for the women, this is for everyone, right?
Yes.
The men, the children, the whole community. And so thank you, Jen, for like being this leader and helping remind us that we matter and that we can be leaders, and that we're leaders even in our own lives, to like ensure that leadership doesn't just mean achievement, but it means like fulfillment, right? Happiness.
Beautiful.
Yeah, you're beautiful, and I love this work, and I just want to say thank you so much. And like being a woman of wonder, this is where we start, right? We start with self, and then we go out into the world. And is there anything you'd like to end with, Jen, or like share, or anything that would inspire people who are maybe like going through it right now?
Yeah, I think the one thing for me is just never losing that connection with your inner knowing.
Knowing. Yeah.
Those little inner whispers that you sometimes hear, just start to create the conditions to hear them more and act on them when you hear them. Give yourself permission to explore them without getting into the end game of what the result is.
Oh, I love that. So like going in, listening, and then just like say, let me see what I can do with this. And I think it'll take us all far, because that's where the power and the beauty lies, right? The love. So thank you. And thank you, everyone, for joining us.